Now that we have our main shape, let's create a subnetwork for it. So select all of these 4 nodes and click on the button, create a subnetwork, like that. So this is going to basically ensure that we are on our OBJ level, we're not getting too many nodes and not gonna get mixed them up. So now let's just turn off the visibility for it and let's start working on all of these switches. So we'll put down a new geometry and let's call it switches. So let's start making some of these switches. So let's start with this one. So what I'm gonna do is let's create some tube. So I'm gonna try to center it right at the center of it. Let's turn on this one, so something like this. And what fairly amount many polygons, let's say 30. So we get very rounded look. So now let's turn on wireframe, and what you see that there's kind of like a extrusion. So what I'm gonna do is exit this one. What I always use is the spacebar H, is basically going to frame our geometry that we have visible. And now let's change the height of it to something maybe like this. And now let's enter an edge loop. So maybe somewhere in here. Now just take this, let's scale it outside, like that. Let's take this, let's bevel it, like that. And now let's add a normal. So let's select all of it and put down normal node. So I have assigned it basically to the N key. So I select all geometry, press N key, and it's automatically going to put down a normal node. Then we can harden up all of these edges, and let's just maybe give it something like this to get a very nice rounded look for these switches, like that. Okay, so we have done this switch. Let's go to the next one. So for this, what we can do is actually reuse this network. So what we do is take this tube and just with Alt and holding down Alt, just drag it out. And let's move it to here. Let's go inside, make sure it's visible. Go inside the wireframe, and let's change its radius scale. Maybe something like this. What's cool about this, for these primitives inside Houdini, there's actually also the kind of like in the viewport UI. You can see that we can change 2 rows and 2 columns. But right now with the beveling, it's actually a little bit more, the extrusions a little bit more useful. So I'm going to show that a little bit later. So but for now, inside the wireframe mode, what we can do is just put down extrude, and with mouse scroll, you can see we can change the inset amount. And what's cool about this, you can actually change the amount of it. So if I hold down Control and use the mouse scroll, you can see the inset amount is actually now 1. So you can see it. So let's put it to 0. Let's go, and let's say I hold down Control and mouse scroll, you can see the increment is actually 1. And what's cool about this, if I hold down Shift, the increment is 0.01. So we can fine tune our extrusion amount. So for us, we have to even more precisely create these kind of insets. So what I'm going to do is go to 0.2 by mouse scroll, and then here just hold down the middle mouse button and go to the 0.00 increments. Same thing maybe like this. Then put down another one, and then again with the 0.0. This is going to be our extrusion. Then select this one and another one. So this is going to be the one that we're gonna leave. And then that's it. So now let's exit the wireframe mode. Let's go inside here. Let's select this, and then extrude it inwards like that. So, and from pictures, I also know that this is kind of a little bit more beveled than the previous ones. Maybe something like this. So in pictures, let's start beveling these. Also the insides of it. Something like this, maybe. And let's actually leave that one. Like that. Now what's cool about this, we can always go change the length of it. Just go to the back to the tube and radius and height. Let's make it maybe something like this, because it is pretty, it's not very high at all. It's not a big extrusion for this one. So now we have taken care of these two switches. Now let's go to this side and let's create this one. Now let's reuse our tube again. So I'm gonna just hold down and let's move it here, and let's move it right to the center of it, something like so. For the radius scale, let's turn off the wireframe, something like this. Now I'm gonna select the edge of it, and always, if you let's select this one, and if you go to the perspective, you start losing the sight of your geometry that you want to select. Something like, well, let's say I'm side here. Let's say I want to bevel this one. I want to go in perspective. You see, it's way too far. Always remember the spacebar and H, spacebar G, and spacebar and F. So you can see the F is actually going to frame our selection. So like that. The spacebar and H is going to home select everything. So let's say we have also visibility flag on this one. So now we have two objects. I press spacebar and H. You see it's going to frame both of them. Now let's start working on this shape. So what I did is let's put some columns, maybe to something like 10 or even 8. Let's put 10. Let's bevel this one so it's not that flat. And now what I'm gonna do is create a copy around the center of this one. So I'm gonna hold down and put down this one, another copy of it. Let's select it and let's move it to I just move it right to the bottom of it. So now let's put down the selectable template flag on poly bevel. So in flags it's selectable template flag. So you can see now that we have two objects that we can see. By default, if we didn't have it, we would see only the one that has a visibility flag on it. So put it selectable template flag on it, go back to the edit one. Let's put it our duplicate node. Just select it and put down a copy node. And before we do anything, what I want to do is actually get my preset. So what I want to do is, so we are on X. So what I want to do is on a Z axis, duplicate it. So we are working on Z axis. So I have presets for X, Y, and Z. It's basically all the same. It basically divides 360 with this channel of this total amount. So let's make sure that we have perfect division between every copy. So let's get back to the Z. But you can see by default our pivot is right at the center of this is the pivot translate. You can see by default it's going to be at the 0. And since you want to copy them at many places, we can't really give a exact placement for it. Because now what we want to do is actually assign hotkeys for the duplication. So for the pivot mode, we want to assign hotkey for pivot mode and the start orientation picking. So what I have done it. So what first of all I press on go inside and press hotkey for the pivot mode. So now what does our pivot can move independently from the actual object. And now if I press my hotkey for the orientation picking, you can see I can now align my pivot that is disconnected from the actual object. And let's say I want to move it in here. But you can see one thing is happening, that it's also rotated. So let's go back and let's do it again. So enter the pivot mode, start orientation picking, and hold down Control and click on the place where I want to align our pivot. So I want to align it right at the center of this polygon. Control, left click, you can see it's only aligned it without actually rotating our pivot. And now just exit your pivot, and that's it. And now what we can do is actually start give our number of copies. You can see it's always going to, no matter how many we have copies, it's always going to be perfect 360 because we have this channel set up. So something like this. Now let's clear our template flags and let's reuse our first tube to create the outer parts of it. So what I'm going to do is select this one, put down scale 2. So you can see that by default it's going to connect it both of these to this one. So this is not necessarily what we want. So I just delete it and let's just duplicate it. So this is basically going to give us only the position of it. correctly. So now let's just, actually we don't even how to edit since it's a too primitive. There's already scale tool inside here. So for the columns, let's make it maybe 30, something like this. Let's put down extrude. Let's hold down shift and middle click and mouse button. And what's cool about this, you can also use these options. You can see I put it inside here, and so that fits inset. So you can use the value ladder also in there. So and now let's just extrude it inwards, something like this. Now we have all of these, and let's actually start combining them. So we know, let's just select all of these and combine them inside one object, something like this. And we know that for this poly extrude, we also have a kind of a back of it. So let's extrude it one time, select these and extrude it, something like this. And now let's just quickly bevel these also. I just give it a little bit of a bevel, like that, so it's not that hard edges. So now let's work on this switch. So first of all, if you have any selectable template flags or whatever, just clean them out. Now let's work on this switch. So for this, it's probably best idea to start with the grid. And now let's put our grid somewhere at the very center. So you see by default the grid is very big. So first of all, let's put it to the Y and Z, actually not X and Y plane. Let's turn on wireframe and let's just start scaling it for our switch. Like that. So it's something like this for the switch size. Since we don't have the most perfect view of it, something like this. So now let's exit. One thing you see, it's actually our normals are actually reversed. So I just put down the reverse normals. For me, it's all 10, like that. You see, I have actually a couple of template flags, so I'm going to deselect them like that. So now let's enter edge loop right at the bottom, right at the center of it. Let's move it inwards and let's bevel it. So basically, this is going to give us this kind of a curve for the button. So one thing though that reverse, you might not find it by default. So what I did in my shelf, what I did is add basically a reverse shelf tool. So what you can do is create your own. So it's basically called shelf tab, add new tool, and in here it's actually not add new tool. I'm gonna delete this. It's the edit shelf tab. You can see you can add basically any node that is inside here. So one thing I think you can't actually find it, so just you have to manually find it. It's in reverse. Once you press apply, it's gonna show up in here. And then what you can do is edit tool, and in hotkeys you can in the scene viewer basically going to make sure that it only works when your mouse is hovering over the scene viewer. It's gonna work. Alt 10 is gonna put down automatically reverse node. So that's one thing to note. So now let's just select these and let's extrude them. Let's extrude them outwards, something like this. Let's also output back. Now what we're gonna do is create this kind of a deframing around it. So for us, the best way for us to do it, let's actually maybe for the poly extrude, I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay, let's leave it like that. And now let's take these and let's duplicate them. Now we have this back, and let's just start scaling them on both sides so that we get something around the shape of the frame around this button, like that. And now I want to make sure that this part is actually flat. So what we do is select it and let's scale it, and just scale it one time on this. Now it's perfectly straight. Or if you have a modeler, you can assign a hotkey, even though you're not in a modeler context, you can still use all the modeler pie menus. I guess it's called radial menus in here. So you can see I have assigned flatten to number 1. So I select it, press on it, press on left. You can see I'm not in modeler context, but I'm still able to use its tools from the radial menus. Like that. Now let's just move it maybe like this. Actually, let's start extruding it. Let's extrude like that. You see our normals are reversed, but that's okay. Now what we're gonna do is actually start. Let's select this. Let's actually extrude it inwards. So let's select it and get this kind of a result like that. And let's extrude it inwards it again like that. Let's take a look at this one. So see, it's probably with the poorly extrude. I just maybe select these. Let's move them inwards a bit like that for the frame. Select these. Let's move it a bit like that. Let's select all of them, all 10. Select them again, all 10. Reverse it. This is basically going to be our button. And if you don't like, you want to maybe, well, I think it's pretty good. So maybe we can see this. There's also this kind of framing around it. So what we can do is just select all of this and bevel it. Something like this. And now let's fix this switch. So first of all, one thing I know that there's a little bit too much play between this. So see the back of it is moving too high. So what we have to do is actually scale it inwards. So what I'm going to do is actually select all these and hide them. So for me, I have set up where I have 3 buttons on visibility. So what I can do is hide selected primitive. So now what we have, it's very similar to the ZBrush, where you can hide some of the primitives. I just make this switch on the back as straight as we can get it, something like this. And now in visibility, we can show all primitives like that. So now we have made it back. Now let's take a look at this switch. Let's move it a little bit inwards more, like that. And let's just go in here and let's scale it in now. Let's take this. Obviously, we could also bevel it. I mean, symmetrize it. But for now, let's just make sure that we don't get any, that we do not have any on the panel side, any kind of a clipping between these. So this looks fine. So back of it, we don't really care what's happening there. So we can just make this a little bit outward like that. And remember that we bevel these points, so what we're going to do is make sure that we have fused them together. So just select all of these and put down a fuse node. This should probably fix it. So we have before this edit, we have 2. After the edit, we have 1. So now what we can do is actually start beveling all of these. So let's just put down the bevel. Maybe something like this. This is gonna give us a little bit more of a rounded look to it. Now let's create this big switch. So it's a little bit bigger than the rest of them. So let's go to our first switch. Let's just duplicate this too. Let's just move it here. I'll just scale it just a bit. Something like this. And now let's just make sure that we have this one. So let's make it somewhere here. Let's bevel it like that. And we can also later on maybe a little bit of a detailing on, but right now I just bevel these and leave it at that. I just create the basic shapes for it. So also let's make this a little bit, maybe the height a little bit bigger, like that. Now for these switches, let's duplicate this tube again. Let's move it here. Make sure it's selected. Let's move it like that. And it's a very small button. I just bevel them a little bit like that, and that's it. So we're done with this one. For this USB, let's start by creating a box. Let's try to center it on center of it. Let's just start scaling in like that. Let's turn on wireframe. So what we're going to do is align it with this edge, something like this, and something like this. Right. Now let's just select, actually not blast, but let's just scale it inwards, something maybe like this. So first of all, let's select these. Actually, I have a couple of template flags, I think, so let's just clear them. So first of all, let's delete the front and bottom. Actually, for the visibility, let's just select all of these edges and let's bevel them first. Like that. Let's select these, delete them. Let's take them and let's extrude them. Not bevel, my bad. Let's extrude them. Let's extrude them inwards, I guess. So something like this. Let's output back and let's reverse the normals. Now what I want to do is create these kind of edges on it. So first of all, let's use a knife tool. So let's select these polygons and create with the knife tool. Basically just cut these polygons up around here like that. This is basically going to create this one, and then we can just flatten it out, something like this. And let's just worry about one thing, so about the one side. So just take these, let's extrude them a little bit, something like this. Let's select these, let's extrude them again like that. And now let's just add two divisions. And now let's take these and extrude them outwards like that. And select these and let's just bevel these edges, something like this. Select all of these, choose them together. Now let's symmetrize. For the mirroring, let's just select all of these and let's lap symmetrize. First of all, you can see that we have the wrong axis. So we know that we're working on the Z axis, so I have a preset for the Z. So what did Z do? Well, it's actually symmetrized Z axis, so we need actually X axis, like that. So you can see that in my preset what I have is basically mirror origin is basically a simple expression which is saying that give me the centroid of the X of this object that I want to mirror it, and that's where the mirror is going to be originated. So let's say we take this and move it inside here. You see our mirror is gonna still work because basically every time we are moving this mirror right at the center of this object like that. So that's a very easy thing to do, and I would recommend you to create these presets so that you know how to manually move this mirroring axis, this one, by yourself. You see you can't even do it since there's an expression, you can't really move it yourself. So that's my one advice, and you can set it up for every one of these. So now we have mirror the X. Let's now mirror also the Y. Let's just duplicate it, pipe inside this one. Let's mirror it Y like that. You see, let's actually dissolve flat edges also like that. So now we have our around it, and let's just create this one. Now let's just copy this front, let's duplicate it, and let's move it inside here. Let's scale it like that. Let's just move this edge to here. like that. Let's actually extrude it. So, well, let's extrude it inwards and then we can just reverse it output back. Let's reverse our normals and let's bevel these edges. Now what we want to do is actually start giving the names for all of these connectors. So what I did is for every one of these pieces that we just created, gave it a name. Basically just put down a name node and give it a name here, and that's it. Now what we can do is actually select all of them, and by holding Alt, drag one of these points out, and now merge them together. You can see they're gonna become black because we don't have a normals for all of them. But that's okay, we can put down a normal after this one, like that, and then just since these objects are pretty similar to it, our smoothing should look fine. I mean, sometimes you don't really want to do it because for other objects maybe smoothing cannot be just with the cusp angle with 60. But for us this time, it's actually gonna work out for this. So if it didn't work out, then you would just have to give a normal before we actually merge together, or after one normal, you can just add, let's say smoothing is working out for everything except for maybe this piece. Then you would just select it and just put down another normal, and you can see it would be a group selection. It basically would override these normals. So now what I'm going to do is actually copy these buttons to their places. So what I'm going to do is actually, let's put down a curve, and with the curve, let's start selecting some of these points. So let's say I want them in here. So obviously, even though the points are in place, it's obviously not completely straight. So what I'm going to do is select this one, and one way we can do it by just symmetrizing it. I'm going to take my mirror it on X. Now we have perfectly symmetrized. Only problem that we have these points. So what we can do is take this and fuse them together. Just increase the amount, make sure that it's 1 point. So these buttons are now taken care of. So this is one way we can do it with symmetrizing. Let's go to this one. So for this, let's duplicate our curve. Make sure visibility flag is on this one, and let's reselect. So what I'm going to do is select these points, press enter, select these, and with the modular menu, I'm gonna make sure that they are aligned. Then select these, and let's just duplicate them on the bottom like that. So now we have 2 buttons taken care of. For the next one, let's start with these 2. So what I'm doing actually for the same shape, for the same connections, I want to only one different nodes for it. So that's where let's just duplicate our curve again. Let's reselect. Let's put down these 2 points. Select them. Let's line them like that. So we have taken care of this one. Now let's duplicate it again. Let's reselect these 2. Let's flatten it. And now only thing that we have is these and these switches. Let's duplicate it. Reselect. Take these. Straighten it out like that. Now that we have almost everything, all we have is these 2 unique parts. So there isn't any copies of these, so we need a unique points for each one of them. So what I'm going to do is, since for curves you need at least 2 of them, let's put down a poly draw. So in poly draw you actually can just add 1 point, and then middle click on it, and that's it. So basically this node is basically holding just 1 point. Let's duplicate it, let's take this point, let's move it to here, like that. And that's it, we have our point set up that we're gonna copy to out. But for that, let's align these and let's actually give them names. To assign a name for all of these points, what we need to do is actually we're gonna use the same name node that we just created. So what you're gonna do is take these and duplicate them, then just cut them off like that and move them around. So what you want to do is make sure that whenever, so let's say you want to small knobs, you want to copy to these points, so these points. So that's we want to basically connect this to that name. Basically now these curves, these points have the same name as the knob that we want to copy to, and all we have to do is assign all of these name nodes to the right points that we want to copy to. Now that we have assigned our name attributes to these points, we have to do is put down a copy to points node. So let's select all these, let's merge them together like that, and this is in copy node. This goes to the target point to copy to, and this goes to the geometry that we want to copy. So now you can see it copies to every point all of this, but what we have to do is go to the piece attribute and put down a name. You can see that we have a couple of problems here. First of all, these are not aligned at all with the actual where they should be in our model. So first of all, let's try to align them. The problem is that every one of these pieces are in its own reference position, and in this copy to point we need to basically for it to match the point that we want to copy to, every one of these original pieces has to be right at the center of our grid. So what we have to do is just to every one of these point them to the very center of our reference grid. So that we can do it pretty easily. Let's put down a for each loop, for each name primitive, but we have a couple of problems here. First of all, it's for this for each loop to begin, we need a primitive attribute, but these points are actually these are actually point attributes, our names. So what we have to do is after the normal, let's put down a attribute promote, and this attribute promote original name is going to be name, original class is point. Now we want to convert it to the primitive, and now give it a new name. Do not select, let's deselect delete the original, create new name, and let's call it name center, like that. Copy it, because we're gonna have to reference it, and in this for each loop, for each end, we have the piece attribute, write in name center. You can see it's basically going to gather seven pieces. This is exactly how many different knobs and switches we have. So we know that this for each loop is working. And now what we have to do is for each loop is basically going to go through one of these actions that we gonna give it, basically going to perform it to every object. What we want to do is put down a match size node. Match size node is very useful. It basically zeroes in everything to the 0, 0, 0 grid right at the center. So what we want to do is center everything, and maybe not on a y, since we want to copy it to the y-axis. Let's on just to y, actually z, just yz, let's put it to win. Basically going to every part is going to now be aligned to the z-axis at the positive z-axis, like that. And now let's go back to copy to points. You can see our copy to points are now basically aligned to these switches correctly, because our actual geometry is right at the center of it, like that. So we could do some aligning, but I think this is fine now. This is one way we could do it, but this is only in a case that we have both of them are the point groups. Since we copy them, that's why they are point groups. Or what we can do is also make sure that these groups are actually primitive. So these actually the geometry that we want to copy, these groups can actually be primitive. So let's do and make them primitive. I just change them all to primitive, like that. And now let's disable everything that we just did in here. Actually, let's disable for now. Let's take a look at our copied points. You can see our copied point still works. Basically, we need a point. We need this to be a point. So all of these points that we want to copy to has to be a point group. But the geometry that we want to copy can also be a primitive group. And if it's a primitive group, we don't have to do any of these attribute promote, because it's already a primitive group. So let's go here, change it to name. You can see we're basically getting the same result as with group promoting. So that's just another way we can do it. This is probably easier way. You know how to create the groups and then promote them and all of that. That's it for this part. On the next one, we're gonna start to boolean out all of these shapes. Some of these switches goes inside, there's a handle on it, there's on the side, and then we're also gonna model all the accessories. So there's still a lot to do, so see you next time.